Friday the 13th, Worcester, England, 1973. He was the guy you trusted with your kids. But on one drunken night, David McGreevy, the man they now call the Monster of Worcester, crossed a line so savage, even hardened cops couldn't look. This isn't a story about madness. It's a story about failure. Personal, institutional, societal. The kind of failure that festers in silence until it erupts in blood. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Before he became known in the world of serial killer documentaries as the Monster of Worcester, David McGreevy was just a boy with a dream, not of blood, but of boats. Born in 1951, McGreevy was a classic military kid. His father served in the British Army, which meant the family moved constantly. Cardiff, Germany, back again. His schooling was scattered, his friendships short-lived. But his mother remembered their years in Germany fondly. Biking in the woods, skiing trips, family picnics. There were no classic early warning signs of a serial killer. No cruelty to animals, no abuse. But there was instability, and one strange act. In Cardiff, young David stole his mother's shopping money and disappeared to Liverpool for no apparent reason. It was impulsive, unexplained, a red flag in hindsight. But in his family's eyes, it was a blip. Nothing more. In 1967, at age 15, David left school and joined the Royal Navy, his lifelong dream. For a working-class kid with no stable identity, the sea offered purpose, structure, brotherhood. Stationed at Portsmouth, he served aboard HMS Eagle, a massive aircraft carrier. His colleagues described him as cocky, loud, arrogant. Always had to have the last word. Not violent, just annoying. Then came the fire. After seeing his name in a logbook, possibly signaling an unwanted job change, McGreevy showed up for duty drunk, angry. He broke into an officer's quarters and set fire to a bin of papers. He claimed it was an accident, a cigarette dropped. But nobody believed him. He was court-martialed, found guilty of negligence, sentenced to 90 days in detention. A psychiatric evaluation was performed, but never shared. Not with his family, not with the public, not with anyone. In the world of serial killer documentaries, there's always a moment, a turning point. This fire was his. By August 1971, David McGreevy was out of the Navy. He showed up at his parents' home, defeated, directionless. They didn't ask too many questions. The military rarely offered answers. He drifted through dead-end job, factory, bartender. Nothing stuck. His arrogance, once tolerated on the ship, got him fired again and again. He started drinking more, sleeping less, until even his own parents kicked him out. He had no money, no friends, no future. And then, someone opened a door. The lodger Clive Ralph, an old friend, invited David to stay with him and his young family in Worcester. It was a cramped, two-bedroom house on Gillam Street, filled with love and 3 small children, Paul, Dawn, and baby Samantha. David offered to babysit, help with chores, chip in a bit for rent. They trusted him. Everyone did. The community saw him as polite, soft-spoken, even a little shy. No one imagined he'd one day be featured in some of the most horrifying serial killer documentaries ever produced. But beneath the quiet exterior was a storm gathering. They wrote letters like lovers from another era, 5 pages, 6 pages, words he couldn't say out loud he poured onto paper. The tragedy. He never really knew her, not truly. But when David McGreevy wanted something, he didn't just want it. He needed it. 1971. Somewhere in the quiet post-war landscape of England, David McGreevy was falling in love, or at least he thought he was. It started with a letter. A friend in the Navy had a sister. Her name was Mary. Soft-spoken, polite, modest. Nothing about her screamed danger or seduction. But when McGreevy saw her photograph, something in him clicked. She was everything he wasn't. Grounded, quiet, clean. He asked for her address, and then he wrote. The letters from January to April 1971, David McGreevy wrote to Mary nearly every other day. 5-page letters, sometimes 6. He poured himself onto the page, memories, jokes, fantasies of the future. He imagined them walking by the river, holding hands, maybe starting a life together in a little flat with checkered curtains. His words were sweet, even poetic. Mary responded kindly, perhaps flattered, perhaps curious. But from the start it was clear. This was his fantasy, not hers. Still, the letters came. His hope grew. In April 1971, they finally met, face to face, for the very first time. 1 week later, he proposed. Yes, 1 week, the kind of thing that would be charming in a love song, reckless in real life, especially when the couple barely knew each other. To David, it wasn't too fast. It was destiny. The fairy tale was happening, and he needed it to be real. This, he believed, would fix him, anchor him, complete him. But Mary hesitated. She said yes, eventually. Or at least she didn't say no. But her heart wasn't in it. Mary suffered from chronic spinal issues. Her health was fragile, sometimes debilitating. The pain left her exhausted, anxious. McGreevy, blinded by the idea of marriage, dismissed it all. But his mother didn't. Bella McGreevy thought Mary was a hypochondriac, that she exaggerated her symptoms for attention. And in a cruel twist, instead of seeing his mother's comment as a red flag, David used it to dig deeper into his fantasy. Now it was him against the world, defending the love of his life, even if it wasn't real. By the summer of 1971, things were unraveling. McGreevy saw Mary only twice, 2 long weekends in June and July. But the letters kept coming, thicker than ever. He wrote about wedding plans, church venues, names for future children. But Mary stopped writing back as much. She was backing away. And David, the man who had lost the Navy, lost his sense of self, and was now losing her, couldn't take it. It ended with a whisper, not a bang. December 31st, 1971, New Year's Eve. While others were celebrating the beginning of something new, David's life was crumbling. Mary broke off the engagement. She was kind, careful, even apologetic. But it was clear she didn't love him. Maybe never had. The engagement was a mistake, one she couldn't carry into the new year. David didn't scream, didn't beg, but something inside him cracked. Another rejection. Another door slammed shut. the spiral begins. What happens when your whole identity is built on something that never existed? David McGreevy didn't just lose a girlfriend. He lost the idea of who he thought he could become. A husband, a provider, a man with a future. That illusion was gone now. So, like before, he turned to the bottle. Not just for comfort, but for clarity. Because only when drunk did the voices quiet down. Only when drunk did he stop replaying her words, her face, the shame. The man once featured in Serial Killer Documentaries as the Monster of Worcester was, in this moment, just a broken man staring into a glass of ale, wondering how it all slipped away. By early 1972, David was jobless, penniless, and homeless. Again. His parents refused to take him back in. He had worn out his welcome in every factory, every pub, every temp job across Worcester. Then, as if by divine luck, Clive Ralph appeared. Clive was a friend from back in the day. Kind. Honest, a working man with a wife and kids. He saw David not as a threat, but as someone who needed help. And David, he played the part. Grateful, polite, soft-spoken. He moved into their cramped home on Gillam Street and slowly found a role. Elsie Ralph, Clive's wife, was a young mother with 3 children under the age of 4. Baby Samantha had just been born. Paul was 3. Dawn, just under 2. David offered to help around the house, cooked Sunday meals, played with the children, paid a small rent. He was, in her words, just a normal guy. She had no reason to fear him. And yet, in every frame of every serial killer documentary, this is the part that chills you most. They trusted him. The man who would one day slaughter their children was, at that moment, reading them bedtime stories. What made him snap? Historians and criminologists still debate what broke David McGreevy. Some say it was the Navy. Others point to Mary. Some say the cumulative effect of failure, rejection, and alcoholism simply short-circuited his moral wiring. But one thing is clear. He didn't just wake up a killer. He became one, piece by piece. Like so many names in serial killer documentaries, the transformation wasn't sudden. It was slow, invisible, the kind you only see in hindsight. He smiled, he drank, he lived in their home, and then, one night, he destroyed it. What makes this chapter so haunting? In most true crime stories, you see the signs: abuse, violence, manipulation. But not here. McGreevy didn't stalk, he didn't plan, he didn't even hate. He simply snapped. He is the nightmare scenario every parent fears, the quiet lodger, the helpful friend, the man with no history of violence, until it's too late. In the archive of serial killer documentaries, David McGreevy's case stands out not just for its brutality, but for its lack of warning. That's what makes it unforgettable. By early 1972, David McGreevy had nothing left. No Navy, no job, no fiancée. He had been kicked out of his parents' house, fired from every temporary job he took, and was drinking more heavily than ever before. Then came Clive Ralph, an old friend, a decent man. Clive offered David a room in his small home on Gillam Street in Worcester. It was a modest 2-bedroom house, already crowded with his wife, Elsie, and their 3 children. Paul, age 3, Dawn, just under 2, and infant Samantha. But they let David in. He wasn't just a guest. He became part of the routine. He paid a small rent, cooked Sunday dinners, played with the kids, helped around the house. He was quiet, polite, sometimes even funny. Elsie later said, "He was just like anybody else, seemed normal, good with the children." To outsiders, David McGreevy didn't look like someone who would end up in serial killer documentaries. But something darker was building under the surface. McGreevy's drinking never stopped. Most evenings, he'd go out to the Vauxhall pub with friends, knock back pint after pint, and stumble home just before midnight. He wasn't always angry, but when he was, people remembered it. One neighbor recalled seeing him walking down the center of the road late at night, arms outstretched like he was testing his balance, daring the cars to come. Even Clive warned him, "You need to sort yourself out. Stop walking in and out of jobs. Stay off the booze." But David didn't listen. Inside the Ralph household, life moved on. Elsie took a part-time job as a barmaid at the Punch Bowl. In the evenings, when she was at work and Clive was driving, McGreevy stayed home with the children, who became their regular babysitter. He fed them, bathed them, put them to bed, and the kids trusted him. Paul liked to show him drawings. Dawn followed him around the house. Samantha, too young to speak, would cry until he picked her up. It seemed safe. Until it wasn't. McGreevy didn't just live in their home, he absorbed it. Day by day, he sank deeper into the illusion that he belonged, that this family could be his, that this role, helper, protector, father figure, was his redemption. But the more he wanted it, the more he realized he didn't fit. He wasn't Clive. He wasn't the provider. He didn't have a job, a wife, or a future. And deep down, he resented that. Samantha's crying started to bother him. Dawn's tantrums wore him thin. Paul's energy annoyed him. The pressure inside him grew. Still, Elsie never suspected a thing. He was a little off, she later admitted, but never violent. But the signs were there, subtle and slow. The more McGreevy drank, the quieter he became, the more withdrawn. He stopped making jokes, stopped talking much at all. He'd stare at the kids too long, smoke more, sleep less. Elsie noticed Samantha was unsettled around him. She mentioned it once to Clive. He shrugged it off. "He's stressed. He's had a rough time," Clive said. "Give him space." But space wasn't what David needed. He needed help. Real help. Psychological help. Intervention. What he got instead was silence. This is the part in every true crime story that haunts the most. The moment before the crime. When everything seems normal, but it isn't. When the danger is already inside the house. McGreevy had already lost everything. Now all he had left was this family. And in his fractured mind, the crying, the chaos, the noise, it all became too much. Serial killer documentaries often dramatize the moment the killer breaks. But the truth? It happens in stages, quietly. On April 12, 1973, David McGreevy put the kids to bed like usual. He was sober, calm, nothing strange. Elsie came home late, kissed the children goodnight, and went to sleep. No one suspected what would happen the next night, the final night. April 13th, 1973. A Friday night like any other in Worcester. Quiet streets, light traffic. The kind of evening where nothing should go wrong. Clive Ralph had just gotten home from work. His wife, Elsie, was getting ready for her shift at the Punch Bowl, the local bar where she worked as a part-time barmaid. Before leaving, she kissed her 3 children goodnight. Paul was 3, full of energy even at bedtime. Dawn was 20 months old, already dozing off. Baby Samantha, just 8 months old, was still fussy. David McGreevy, as usual, stayed behind to babysit. It wasn't the first time. He had done it many times before. Nothing had ever gone wrong. Clive dropped Elsie off around 8:30 p.m. Then he returned home and checked in on McGreevy. Everything seemed fine. The children were asleep. McGreevy was quiet. Later that evening, McGreevy went out to the Vauxhall pub with a friend. They drank, played darts, talked. By most accounts, McGreevy had between 5 and 7 pints. Not blackout drunk, just enough to blur judgment. Just enough to stir the anger already simmering inside him. At some point during the night, he got into a small argument with his drinking companion. Nothing serious, just words exchanged over a cigarette, stubbed in a drink. Then Clive came to collect him. The 2 men got in the car and returned to Gillam Street. McGreevy went inside. Clive left again to pick up Elsie from the bar. It was just after 10:30 p.m. That's when everything broke. What happened inside that house in the next 30 minutes became one of the most horrific crimes ever committed in British criminal history. A story that would define David McGreevy forever as the Monster of Worcester and earn him a place in the darkest corners of serial killer documentaries. No one witnessed the moment McGreevy snapped, but investigators later pieced together what happened. Samantha was crying. That much is certain. She was the youngest, the most fragile. She had likely started fussing shortly after Clive left the house. Maybe she was hungry. Maybe she just couldn't sleep. But for McGreevy, in his drunken and volatile state, the sound was unbearable. Instead of soothing her, he lost control. He struck her. Then, in a fit of rage, he attacked her again. A post-mortem revealed Samantha suffered a skull fracture, a compound fracture caused by blunt force. She died in her crib, but McGreevy didn't stop there. The cries had woken Paul and Dawn. In the confusion, they may have wandered into the hallway, scared and disoriented. McGreevy turned on them next. Paul was strangled with a piece of wire, investigators believe. Dawn had her throat cut with a kitchen knife. 3 children, 3 different methods of killing. No plan, just blind, escalating violence. And then the most disturbing act of all. After killing them, McGreevy mutilated their bodies. He carried the 3 small corpses into the basement where he found a pickaxe handle. With it, he struck the bodies again, causing further damage even after death. Finally, in an act that would shock even the most hardened detectives, he carried the children's bodies outside and impaled them on the iron railings in front of the house. 3 small, lifeless forms, displayed, not hidden, not buried, displayed. It was almost theatrical, as if he wanted the world to see, as if he wanted to show what he had done, or what he was capable of. Serial killer documentaries often show the monster in the shadows. David McGreevy didn't hide in shadows. He put his crime on display. At around 1:30 a.m., Clive and Elsie returned home. They never made it inside. Police had already arrived. A neighbor had seen something, maybe a figure outside, maybe the horror itself. The officers met Clive and Elsie outside and told them they had to come to the station. No explanations, no details, just urgency. Elsie asked for her children. She was told nothing. Later, at the police station, they told her the truth. Her 3 children were dead. They didn't tell her how. Not yet. Elsie collapsed. She was sedated and kept away from the scene. She never saw the bodies again. The next morning, police launched a full-scale search for David McGreevy. He was missing, but not for long. At 3:50 a.m., he was found wandering the streets, not far from the house. When police arrested him, he said only, "What's this all about?" Later, in custody, he confessed, "I put my hand over her mouth and it went from there," he said. He described how he killed each child, calmly, with no visible remorse. But he gave no motive. When asked why he impaled the bodies, he simply said, "All I could hear was kids, kids, kids." The case stunned the nation. Even seasoned reporters were shaken. One journalist later recalled, "I've covered dozens of murders, but this was different. This was evil." The killings were widely reported, but oddly, David McGreevy's name didn't stick in public memory the way other killers did. He wasn't as infamous as the Moors murderers or Fred and Rose West. But those who remember everything, especially the iron fence, especially the silence. This was not a man with a long criminal history, not a violent past, just a man who lived quietly among others, until he didn't. That's what makes the Monster of Worcester one of the most terrifying profiles in any true crime case. The killer was already inside the home, and nobody knew. David McGreevy was arrested in the early hours of April 14, 1973. By sunrise, the quiet town of Worcester was holding its breath. 3 children had been murdered, their small bodies left impaled on iron railings in front of their home, a display so gruesome it stunned even the most experienced officers. The man responsible wasn't a stranger. He was the babysitter, the lodger, the friend. And now, David McGreevy, the man who once dreamed of a naval career, had become a central figure in one of the most horrifying child murder cases in Britain, one that would later be retold in numerous serial killer documentaries. On April 16, 1973, McGreevy appeared in Worcester Magistrates' Court. The public response was immediate. The courtroom was packed. Dozens of women stood outside, many holding their children, visibly shaken and angry. Some wept. Others demanded answers. Everyone wanted to see the face of the man now being called the Monster of Worcester. McGreevy showed no emotion. He didn't speak. Over the next several weeks, he would appear in court 10 times for remand hearings. Each time, police had to escort him under heavy guard. There were threats. There were outbursts. There was rage, not just from the Ralph family, but from an entire community. And yet, McGreevy remained silent. No protest, no explanation. In late June 1973, just 9 weeks after the murders, the case took a turn. McGreevy pled guilty. The hearing lasted 8 minutes. There was no trial, no psychological defense, no motive offered, no courtroom drama. Many believed it was one of the shortest proceedings ever held for a crime so brutal, especially one that would later be dissected in depth by true crime researchers and featured in major serial killer documentaries. On July 30th, 1973, McGreevy was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. The presiding judge said, "The crimes were so appalling and the risk of repetition so great that I have no hesitation in giving the maximum sentence available." For Elsie and Clive Ralph, it wasn't enough. Not after what they lost. Elsie never returned to the house on Gillam Street. She was never allowed to see the bodies of her children. Sedated and traumatized, she struggled for years with grief and depression. Her marriage to Clive ended not long after. In an interview years later, she said, "Even prison is too good for him." Meanwhile, McGreevy disappeared into the British prison system. For years, his name faded from public memory. But behind bars, he was never forgotten. In the strict social hierarchy of prison, child killers like McGreevy are treated as the lowest of the low. He was attacked, threatened, and isolated. He spent much of his time in protective custody, unable to mix with the general prison population. By the early 2000s, McGreevy had served well beyond the minimum term. He was transferred to an open prison, allowed supervised day release, given limited freedoms. That all changed in 2006 when a reporter from The Sun recognized him at an internet cafe in Liverpool. The public was outraged. How could the man who murdered and impaled 3 children be walking free, browsing the internet, sipping coffee? The headlines exploded. For many who had forgotten his name, it was a brutal reminder. David McGreevy was still alive, still here, still hoping for release. He was moved back to a closed prison. But the controversy didn't stop there. In 2000s, McGreevy's legal team filed for an anonymity order, citing his right to life and protection under the Human Rights Act. They argued that if his identity was made public again, he would be targeted in prison, maybe even killed. For a time, the courts agreed. The press was banned from naming him. He became simply Prisoner M. But in 2013, the media pushed back. Several British outlets challenged the order, arguing that the public had a right to know. They invoked a principle that lies at the heart of British justice. Justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. This wasn't just a legal case, it was a moral one, and the court agreed. The anonymity order was overturned. The name David McGreevy returned to the headlines, this time not as an anonymous inmate, but as a free man seeking reintegration into society. His past now uncovered again, McGreevy once more became the subject of public debate, international media coverage, and countless true crime retrospectives. To this day, many believe he should never be released, not because of technicalities, but because of principle. No psychological report has ever fully explained why he did what he did. McGreevy himself has never expressed public remorse, and without a motive, without an apology, and without understanding. What is justice? That's what continues to haunt this case. That's why serial killer documentaries still revisit the story. It's not just about the horror of the murders. It's about how close evil can live to us, unnoticed, trusted, even welcomed, until the moment it's too late. David McGreevy was sentenced to life in prison in July 1973. But for those who survived what he did, the real sentence was just beginning. Elsie Ralph never returned to Gillam Street. She never saw her children again. She and her husband divorced within months of the murders. Their family was gone. Their home had become a crime scene. She tried to take her own life. She spent years under medication, lost in grief. In interviews, she never spoke McGreevy's name again. "Even prison is too good for him," she once said. In Worcester, things were never the same. Parents became more cautious. Neighbors became less trusting. The name Monster of Worcester became an unwanted shadow that lingered over the town for decades. Meanwhile, McGreevy disappeared behind prison walls. Inside, he wasn't just another inmate. He was a child killer. And in prison, that made him a target. He was assaulted, threatened, moved from prison to prison. He spent most of his time in isolation or in vulnerable prisoner units. Still, he never complained, never gave interviews, never showed remorse. By the 2000s, McGreevy had served more than double his minimum sentence. Some said that was enough. Legally, he was eligible for release. The parole board began reviewing his case. Reports suggested he was stable, non-violent, compliant. But McGreevy had never explained why he killed. He never apologized, never offered a motive. That silence became the center of the debate. Could someone who murdered 3 children and never said why ever be considered safe again? In 2009, his legal team filed for an anonymity order. They claimed that revealing his identity would put his life at risk. They cited Articles 2, 3, and 8 of the Human Rights Act, the right to life, protection from inhumane treatment, and the right to privacy. Court agreed. For 4 years, the press was banned from naming him. He became Prisoner M. But in 2013, media outlets pushed back. They argued that justice must be public, that people had a right to know who he was, especially if he was being considered for release. The court ruled in favor of transparency. The anonymity order was lifted. David McGreevy's name returned to the headlines, and the public remembered, with anger, with fear, and with disgust. He became the subject of serial killer documentaries, news specials, and true crime investigations once again. His story, long buried in archives, came back to life. Still, no one knows where he is now. Some believe he is still in a closed prison. Others say he was quietly released under a new identity, like other notorious child killers in Britain. The government has never confirmed. What's certain is this: his silence remains. He has never written a letter to the Ralph family, never sat for an interview, never explained what happened inside that house on April 13th, 1973. In most true crime cases, closure comes with confession. But in this case, there is none. There is only absence. That's what makes McGreevy different, and why his case continues to appear in serial killer documentaries even after 50 years. Not because of what he said, but because of what he never did. I said enough. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.